Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 130. Shop Till You Drop. Midoriya had crept out of his room damn near silently before the buzzer for the dryer even sounded. Shota had gone off to shower, and Hisashi wouldn't have even noticed Midoriya if he didn't just happen to look up when he did. He was so quiet, even worse than Sho, who, despite living together for a decade at this point, still managed to scare the crap out of them, at least on a weekly basis. Thankfully, they managed to not jump out of their skin as he passed by. He probably would have apologized 16 times before they got him to drop the non-issue. When Midoriya walked back out with a hamper full of clothes, they spoke up before he could scurry off again. I want to help you with that, kiddo. We need to go through what you've got and figure out what you need, he said, hoping to nip his denials in the bud. I don't need anything. I'm fine. You don't have to do that. He tried to deny regardless. All of your clothes fit in one load of laundry. That's not enough, he pointed out. I wear my uniform most of the time anyway. Don't. Kid, this isn't negotiable. He interrupted as kindly as he could. It's not just up to us anyway. The social worker isn't going to be happy with us if we don't make sure you have proper clothes. You have enough to scrape by, but you need more than the bare minimum. You deserve more than the bare minimum. Midoriya wasn't looking at them. He had his eyes glued to the hamper in his hands, and he was making no move to respond. Come on, let's toss that onto the bed, and we can go through it together, he prompted gently. Midoriya obeyed immediately and without complaint. As much as they didn't want the kid to fight them on this, his compliance didn't make them feel any better. It felt like coercion, and it didn't sit right with them, but it needed to be done. Okay, let's sort everything into types. Shirts in one pile, pants in another. Underwear, we're going to get you more of regardless, because I don't think either of us want me to study those for their structural integrity. Same with socks. You can just throw those in a drawer or whatever you want to do with them for now. Hisashi started as they walked into the room. Midoriya already had a blush high on his cheeks, and they waited by the door as he picked all of his underwear and socks out before Hisashi walked in and took a seat on the corner of the bed. They sorted through things in silence, and the kid seemed to be avoiding eye contact, so they just let him. If that was going to make this easier, then it was fine. He'd glanced at the things he'd tossed in the wash and seen the patching he'd done, but he didn't get a super good look at it. Now that he was getting the chance to see things up close, he was even more impressed. There were repairs he would have never noticed if he weren't looking for them. You're pretty good at sewing, he remarked as he folded a very well-worn All Might t-shirt that was almost faded beyond recognition. I wouldn't notice half these patches if I wasn't looking for them. He got a stuttered thanks in response, but other than that, he remained silent. Hisashi just went back to work. They hadn't expected to start a conversation, but it would have been nice. They noticed a pair of black cargo pants that had an additional seam up the front of the left leg. These must be his Ivy pants. That stitch was probably from when Chio had cut the leg after Sho threw them at a fire escape. He smiled and shook his head as he folded them. This kid must have so many stories. He looked forward to the day that he was comfortable enough to share them, though he imagined most of them weren't as bittersweet as that one was, in hindsight at least. He couldn't hide the smile on his face when he picked up a black hoodie with the Put Your Hands Up Radio logo on the front of it. You got style, kiddo, they joked as they held it up. Midoriya's face went from the persistent light blush he'd been sporting since Hisashi stopped him in the living room to completely beet red. He looked like a strawberry, and it was adorable. I can get you plenty more of these, but they might not be so vintage, he quipped as he folded it. He still looked uncomfortable, but he huffed out a breath through his nose and was pressing his lips together in an awkward approximation of a smile. That was something at least. The green hoodie that they knew he wore on patrol had certainly seen better days. The sleeves were more patched than they were original fabric, but it was sturdy. It wasn't fraying anywhere, and it was obviously well taken care of. He folded it with care and set it on top of the other hoodie. The rest of the clothes weren't overly remarkable. There wasn't a single article of clothing that hadn't had to be repaired at one point, but they were all still usable, if a little threadbare. They had a feeling that Midoriya would just patch them up whenever the worn bits got too bad. He had 2 hoodies, 2 t-shirts, 7 long-sleeve shirts, no shorts, and 4 pairs of pants, 2 of which were his patrol pants, and nothing was the same size. He didn't even have a proper coat. How the hell had he been going through the winters? Layers, they supposed. But that wasn't good enough. All right, this is a good start, but you need more clothes. How much of this fits you properly? I, um, don't know. They all fit. Just because they physically fit onto you doesn't mean they fit you correctly, but that's okay. We'll figure out what size works best tomorrow. We're going to get you some basic necessities, clothes, and toiletries being the biggest concern at the moment, he informed. Midoriya didn't look pleased about that, but he didn't argue. Any dinner requests? They asked, not expecting an answer. Midoriya shook his head. All right, we'll probably just have leftovers then. I'll start heating it up soon, he said before walking out of the room. He shut the door gently behind himself and turned into the living room only to see Shota already heating up dinner. Great minds think alike, or maybe it was just 7 o'clock. Izuku was not looking forward to tomorrow. The thought of going to the mall at all would have been enough to put him off, but he knew they weren't going to let him buy anything himself. He couldn't really buy anything himself anyways. All of his money had been taken up by tuition, and he only had like a few thousand yen left. What was considered a reasonable amount of clothes? How much were they going to spend on him? He didn't want any of this. He barely ever went anywhere outside of school or patrol, and, well, one of those was no longer an option. Accepting food from All Might was one thing. He really did need that, but, oh gosh, he was going to have to get him to cancel that now. He did his best to refrain from screaming into his pillow. This sucked so much. He could hear them getting dinner ready in the kitchen, and he didn't want to leave the room. Well, that's not true. He did want to leave the room. He had been eyeing the window and resisting the temptation to bolt for a while now. But that wasn't going to get him very far. They couldn't physically stop him from leaving, but obligation kept him tethered well enough that it didn't matter. He wasn't even hungry. They'd been giving him so much food that he could hardly stomach it. He really didn't want dinner at all. 3 meals a day was a truly insane amount of food. He'd been eating as much as he could of what they offered, but he was going to have to stop or at least slow down. He felt nauseous, and he was pretty sure they would take more offense to him running away from the table to puke than they would from him not finishing his plate. He felt like a grade A a-hole for stressing out about having too much food, and the thought sent another wave of exhaustion through him. There wasn't a damn thing he could do without feeling guilty anymore. And he was so tired. Regardless of his own feelings, he got up when he was called and sat down for dinner. He was too scared to offer to do the dishes, so he ran back to the guest room to hide. As he sat on the bed with his legs pulled up against his chest, he wondered if he was ever going to be able to breathe past the suffocating cloud of guilt that surrounded him. He hoped he would, but hope had left him wanting before, and he had no doubt that it would do it again. Shota told them that he had errands to run and left the apartment about 15 minutes before he and Midoriya did. He was just going to walk to the store a few blocks away to get the kiddo a phone, so Hizashi made sure to give him time to get out of sight before they left. He doubted that Midoriya knew this side of town well enough to guess where Shoto was headed if they saw him, but he'd rather be safe than sorry. Today was going to be stressful enough as is. They listened to some music in the car on low volume as they drove along, but they turned it off once they found a parking spot. Okay, we're going to have a pep talk before we go in there. I know you don't want us spending money on you. I know it's uncomfortable, but let me explain it from our perspective. First of all, he trailed off as he tapped at his phone screen before showing it to Midoriya. This is my bank account. He tried not to laugh as the kiddo's eyes went wide, looking at the number on the screen. I have 3 very well-paying jobs. Sho has 2, and this isn't even our joint account. We have more money than we know what to do with, and this is after throwing a good deal of it at charities. Nothing you pick out today will affect our finances enough to matter even a little bit. They explained, pausing for a moment to let the words sink in. Besides all of that, even if we were living paycheck to paycheck, we want to provide you with the things you need. If you had the money to buy your friends anything they wanted just to make them happy, wouldn't you? They asked. Midoriya didn't answer that. He sputtered out some nonsense syllables before giving up, furrowing his brow and looking down at his lap. All right, that was probably too much too soon. They stayed quiet and gave him a few minutes to think before they spoke again. What you thinking about, kiddo? His brow only furrowed more at their questioning. He started biting at his lip and wringing his hands, too. Now wasn't the time to talk. Not if it was just going to stress him out more than he already was. I know it's probably hard to figure out what you're feeling about all of what's going on, and it's even more difficult to talk about it. So we don't have to do that right now. Let's just focus on what needs to get done instead. I made a list of things that we need to get today and another list of things that we could get today, but could also wait for another day if it's too much all at once. They explained as they handed over the 2 lists. Midoriya took them in an unsteady hand and started looking over them. He seemed to be calmer when he had something to do. That's probably why Sho insisted that they let him do his laundry and dishes. They made a mental note of that. They would prefer that Midoriya felt comfortable enough existing without feeling the need to do something for them in payment, but hopefully that would come in due time. Baby steps. They waited for him to review the lists, and when it looked like he was done, they opened their door and got out of the car, wordlessly prompting him forward. As expected, he followed their lead, falling in step or half a step behind them as they made their way to the mall's entrance. It was still pretty early on a Sunday morning, so it wasn't too busy, but that was going to change soon. They'd better get a move on. In the interest of saving time, he picked a store that he knew would have all the clothing items they would need and didn't bother asking Midoriya where he'd like to go. Talking seemed to be an issue for him right now, and they doubted that he had the first idea as to what store they should go to anyway. Okay, we should be able to find all the clothes you need here. Men's section is over this way, but I get half my clothes from the women's section, so it doesn't really matter. Whatever you're more comfortable with, they said, gesturing toward the sections. It was a pretty tame decision. Hopefully, that would be a good one to start off a day of forcing the poor kid to make choices he didn't want to make. He looked around nervously and headed toward the men's section without a word. Good. Decision 1 of many complete. Izuku was doing his best to keep his cool, but the list Mike gave him was too much. He couldn't even wear half the stuff that they wanted him to get in public. He hadn't worn shorts or t-shirts out for years because of his scars, and he didn't think he was going to get out of buying those without explaining that. He really didn't want to explain that. There were a few articles of clothing that he could begrudgingly admit would be nice to have, but 7 t-shirts and 3 pairs of shorts did not make that list. He went to grab a basket, but Mike grabbed a cart, so he put it back. This was fine. He stood at the front of the men's clothing section and his feet got stuck in place. It was late May. There weren't very many long sleeves. There would probably be a clearance section with some out of season stuff, right? He had no clue where that might be, though. The normal prices he could see from here made him nauseous. Why was a singular t-shirt 3,500 yen? And why the hell were those jeans 9,500 yen? He was doing his best to remind himself that Mike and Eraser were apparently richer than God, but his feet still remained in place. This was too much for him. He didn't need all of this. He didn't want all of this. He wanted to go back home to the brewery where he couldn't bother anyone. And, kiddo, Mike's voice cut through his thoughts. He couldn't find the words to respond. He could barely even look at them. Mike walked around until he was standing in front of him, and he resisted the urge to stare at his feet. "What's your favorite color?" he asked. "Huh? I have a pretty good guess, but I want to hear it from you," they said with a laugh and a glance toward his shirt. His green shirt. Oh, haha, yeah, half his clothes were green, but that was only in part because it was his favorite color. It was easier to patch things when everything was the same color. It blended together better. Green, he replied. "Yeah, I figured. Come on, let's go look for some green stuff. You've got a convenient hair color for that. Or do you think the favorite color is because of the hair? Which came first, the chicken or the egg?" Mike mused as he led the way into the racks. He was trying to distract him. He knew he was. It wasn't not working. He had wondered that in the past, but it led to too much introspection for his taste, so he just let Sleeping Beast lie. For now, he chose to believe that Mike was just asking a rhetorical question because he didn't have the proper words to answer him at the moment. "What's your opinion on graphic tees?" Mike asked, holding up a sage green t-shirt with a few abstract lines that came together to sort of resemble a minimalist mountain landscape. Oh gosh, it had to be the first question, didn't it? Why couldn't he have just gone over to the jeans instead of getting stuck in place like an idiot? Jeans were fine. He had no problem with jeans. He was growing out of his anyway. He could use a new pair of jeans. He had burn scars covering most of his forearms from the Yakudo raid. They were kind of faint, but they were still obvious against his pale skin, and that wasn't even to mention the ugly gnarled flesh that peeked out from under short sleeves on his shoulder. The burns his father had given him were disgusting. They had healed poorly. He couldn't force people to look at that. He could hardly stand to look at them, and they'd been a part of his body for over half his life now. Midoriya, look at me." His attention was brought back to Mike's face. He looked concerned. "Good. Kiddo, can you hear me?" Damn it, what did he miss? What did he do? He nodded his head quickly. "Can you tell me what triggered that? Was it something about that shirt in particular?" He nodded again. "Okay, then we won't get that one. Can you tell me more specifically what was wrong with it?" Damn it. Frickin' damn it. No, no, can't. Not without questioning. Hey, come on, stay with me. It's all right. You don't have to explain it in detail. I just want to know what it is so we can avoid it. What? Surely he didn't mean that. T-shirts made up like half the list. They couldn't avoid half the list. God, it was just a freaking shirt. He needed to pull himself together. "I don't like short sleeves." He forced himself to stutter out in explanation. "Oh." Mike looked up and furrowed his brow like he was thinking for a moment. "Okay, that's fine. Let's find some long sleeves. Might be difficult with summer around the corner, but I'm sure we can find something." He dismissed easily and walked off to the next few racks, glancing around and ignoring anything with short sleeves. What? Just like that? He was going to drop the issue? Just like that? He was a little dumbstruck as Mike walked away, but he got his wits about him quickly and scurried after him. What about this? They asked, holding up a dark green crew neck. He tried to glance at the price, but Mike was standing in front of the rack where it was posted. Doesn't matter how much it costs, kid. Do you like it? I, yeah, it's nice, he answered reluctantly. Okay, good. I'm gonna guess you're a small. I think it's supposed to be a little bit fitted, but if you don't like that, we can get a bigger size. I'll grab both a small and a medium, and you can decide after you try it on, he explained as he dropped 2 shirts into the cart and kept walking. As he walked away, Izuku couldn't help but glance at the price. 2,500 wasn't awful. He could probably get pretty much the same thing at a thrift store for half the price, though. Richer than God, Izuku. They're richer than God. He took a deep breath and dutifully followed after Mike again. Midoriya seemed to be doing much better after they took t-shirts off the list. He cringed when they walked over to the shorts, so they wordlessly took those off too. They had a feeling it was to hide the scarring that Sho had told them about, and the thought broke his heart. They had a good idea of how most of those scars were acquired, but not all of them. Chio had marked down what she could remember on a chart, and the slashes and stab wounds made sense. The burns on his arms as well, but the burn that apparently covered half of his torso remained a mystery. That would probably be a part of Sho's investigation. They'd figure it out eventually, so there was no use asking about it now. They made sure to pick out some lightweight pants and shirts for the warmer weather so that he would have something to wear and not overheat. It was probably better for his health to keep the scarring covered up when exposed to the sun anyways, but they would have to get them looked at by a professional to know for sure. He didn't show much interest in any one thing over another. The wardrobe he selected was very plain, and they supposed that was because he had never gotten the chance to find a style for himself. They hoped that he would be comfortable enough to try someday, but today was not that day. Today was for the essentials. They ended up with 10 shirts, 3 pairs of pants, and a few packs of underwear and socks. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough for now. He made a point to purposefully forget to pick up hangers until they got in line and sent Midoriya to the other side of the store to pick them up while he paid for the clothes. They didn't doubt that the kid was keeping a running tally already, but on the off chance he wasn't, there was no need for him to know the total price of the trip. It would only stress him out more. Midoriya stayed with him as they went through the line again after apologizing 3 times for not getting back fast enough. He patiently dismissed the apologies each time and stuffed the second receipt into his pocket with the first. The mall was starting to fill up now. Shoppers were milling about and looking through the windows while they chatted loudly and blocked the walkways. It wasn't crazy, nothing he would have noticed if he had been here on his own, but he could see the way Midoriya shied away from the louder groups of kids and stuck Hisashi in between himself and anyone that got too close. That was equal parts upsetting and reassuring. They didn't like that he saw threats everywhere he went, but it was good that they themselves weren't considered a threat as well, or at least they were considered to be a lesser threat. All right, kiddo, I think that's enough mall for today. It's getting a little busy. We're going to stop somewhere else for toiletries and then we can head home, he informed, and started leading the way back to the car. The look of relief was palpable, and they had to do their best to keep a straight face. They didn't think they would ever find someone who hated malls more than Sho did, but those two were a lot more alike than he would have thought at first glance. Midoriya insisted on carrying all the bags, and they let him. If feeling useful helped, then they wouldn't take that away from him. Thankfully, the walk wasn't too far, and the car hadn't gotten too hot in their absence. Ever since he brought up his dislike for short sleeves earlier, they had become acutely aware that they had never seen Midoriya out of his usual full-length pants and sleeves. They were sure that combination had resulted in heat stroke before, but it wouldn't happen again. Not on their watch. Just because he was used to overheating doesn't mean he had to be. The lightweight fabrics they got today and access to air conditioning would certainly help that issue as well. "What kind of music do you listen to, kiddo?" they asked as they adjusted the car's AC and turned on the radio. Um, oh, I dunno, just whatever's on the radio, he replied with a shrug. "We gotta find your sound." Sho doesn't care too much for music one way or the other. He just listens to whatever I put on. He's a stick in the mud. He doesn't know how to jam out, they complained lightheartedly as they put on a good mixed variety station and turned it up a bit. They did their best to pay attention to Midoriya's reactions to each song that came on as they drove along, but he didn't do much besides matching his nervous leg bouncing to the beat. He had a good sense of rhythm, at least. That was more than he could say for Sho. He might do good with drums or bass, but they were getting ahead of himself again. They needed to get him to accept basic necessities before they tried to get him to pick up any sort of hobby. Plus, he seemed to be more inclined to pick up sewing or building of some sort with all the tools he had. They could hold out hope for a musician in the making, though. If a radio was among the few personal effects he owned, then he could reasonably say he enjoyed music to some degree. There was hope. They pulled up to a pharmacy corner store after only a few songs, so the musical exploration had to pause for a moment. "I made another list for this store, but these are all must-haves, I'm afraid," he explained as he handed over another list and pulled the keys out of the ignition. As he had before, Midoriya followed half a step behind him as they walked into the store. It was much less crowded here, and the kiddo seemed very relieved by that. He led the way over to the hair care aisle first. The kid's hair was in a sad state. They'd only seen him with it down a few times, but it had been ridiculously frizzy each time. He probably needed a haircut desperately, and they doubted he'd used conditioner once in the last 4 years. It certainly looked like that was the case, at least. The haircut would have to wait, but product would be able to tame it well enough until they got around to that. "Do you have a brand preference?" they asked, gesturing to the shelves of shampoo and conditioner in front of them. I, no," he answered in a way that made it sound like he hadn't even seen these products in his life. "What have you been using?" they asked casually, but they feared the answer. "Bar soap," Midoriya replied as he stared down at his shoes. "Terrific. Oh, his poor hair." "Okay, well, it looks like you've got a good amount of curl to your hair. This is what I get for Sho, so if it doesn't work out for you, we can just give it to him," they offered, hoping the promise of nothing going to waste would ease his anxieties. He just nodded his head in response. He looked tired. Not that that said much. He had looked exhausted to varying degrees for the past 3 days, but he looked more tired than he had this morning. They wondered if they had ever seen this kid well rested. They probably hadn't, and honestly, they feared what a well-rested Midoriya was capable of if he'd done all that they'd seen him do while running on fumes and living in an abandoned warehouse. The little listener was so amazing. They were looking forward to helping him shine as bright as he was meant to. That was going to take a while, though. So, for now, they'd have to settle on making his hair shine. They could tell he had a beautiful mane waiting to be unleashed from its dry, frizzy prison. "Okay, deodorant should be the next aisle over." They pressed him onward. How the hell was shopping more tiring than training with All Might? And how the hell could he be so tired and not able to sleep? Stress. Stress was probably the answer to both of those questions. Mike dragged him through every damn near aisle of the store until the basket he was carrying was threatening to spill over and his legs were threatening to give up on him. He had heard the phrase "shop till you drop" before, but he was pretty sure it wasn't meant to be taken so literally. Mike sent him off to start the car while he waited in line so that he couldn't see the total price again. Not that the gesture really did much. He had seen what everything cost. He knew exactly how much they had spent on him today. But he was so damn tired that he didn't bother trying to fight it. He sat down in the car and cranked the AC like Mike had asked him to, even though they hadn't been in the store long enough for the car to get that hot. The air chilled his skin quickly, but he didn't do anything to change it. He was exhausted, and the cool air was giving him a very limited bout of artificial energy. He stared through the windshield at the brick wall they had parked in front of and wondered how the hell he ended up here. The amount of incredibly improbable events that had to have occurred for him to be sitting here right now was a statistical marvel, and he found himself laughing at the absurdity of it. He shut himself up quickly because he realized that he probably looked insane and he didn't want to explain this to Mike. What would he even say? Oh, don't worry about me. I'm totally not off my rocker. I was just having a laugh because my life is so screwed up that I don't know what else to do. Yeah, that wouldn't go over well. He kept his mouth shut and forced his eyes to stay open as he waited. He was so damn tired. He just wanted to go home. But he was never going to get to go back there. Everything was different now, and he did his best to come to terms with that. If the way he had to hold back tears and press his lips together to stop their trembling was anything to go by, then he'd say that his best wasn't good enough. The drive back to the apartment passed in a blur that he didn't even try to pay attention to. Mike didn't try to talk to him again, and he was grateful for that. He's not sure he would be able to keep his breakdown at bay if he had to speak right now. He kept his eyes on his lap because he felt like even the sights of this unfamiliar part of town would be enough to set him off. He was so pathetic. By the time he got back to the car, Midoriya looked vacant. He glanced up to them and said a quiet thank you that felt more performative than like actual gratitude, which was fine. He didn't need to be grateful. Hizashi fully understand why he wasn't grateful. The kiddo didn't ask for any of this. He didn't want any of this, and they knew that. The nervous bouncing of Midoriya's leg did not adjust to the beat of the radio on the short drive back home, which was disappointing, but not unsurprising. They had been out for a few hours, and he was already tired when they left. They might need to get Midoriya on some melatonin, too. They're not sure how much he was sleeping, but it clearly wasn't enough. He only got the chance to pick up one singular bag before Midoriya scooped the rest up, and again, Hizashi just let him. It'd be nice to have a free hand to open the door anyway, and he did not seem to be struggling with the weight. They led the way back upstairs and saw Sho's shoes in the Genkan before he spotted him puttering around the kitchen making lunch. Their eyes caught, and Sho raised an eyebrow in question, asking how it went. They pursed their lips and raised their brows to say that it was kind of a shit show, but it could have been worse. As they walked further into the apartment past the Genkan, Sho looked at him and raised a brow again before shooting a pointed look toward the dining table and the new phone still in its box that sat there. Was now a good time for this? He shifted his focus back to Midoriya, who was biting his lip and looking at the box on the table as well. All right. Looks like now was the time whether they wanted it to be or not. It's yours, kid, Sho spoke up casually. His lip was trembling despite it being trapped harshly between his teeth, and his brow was furrowed in a way that made it look like he was in pain. He walked over to the table, set one of the bags down, and used his free hand to pick the box up and shove it into one of the bags. When he turned around to look at them, his eyes were glassy as he bowed and forced out another stiff and insincere thank you before making his way back to his room. That could have gone worse, they supposed. The poor kid was probably having a breakdown behind the shut door, though. They went to the bathroom and set down the bag of toiletries on the sink. They strained their ears as they walked past the kid's door, but they couldn't hear anything. He had expected as much. He had hardly heard anything while he was in the room with the kid as he had a breakdown. Crying silently was a learned skill, and it made him nauseous to know how good Midoriya was at it. I assume it didn't go well? Sho asked as he walked back into the living room. It went fine. He got overwhelmed, but we got what we needed to get, they replied as they plopped down in one of the bar stools at the counter. They should get another one of these. There were only two. I'd give him time and bring him lunch after we're done. He's probably having a breakdown right now, they added as they watched Sho finish up the sandwiches he was preparing. He nodded his head, set a plate in front of them, and grabbed them both drinks before he took his spot to their left. Neither of them said anything as they poked at their food, but Hizashi knew they were both turning the same thought over in their heads. It never felt so wrong to do the right thing. End of chapter.